Hi, everybody. Tonight, let's drift together into a world long forgotten. A world before cities, before clocks, before history itself was written. We're going back to a time when the sun was your alarm, fire was your companion, and every rustle in the bushes might mean survival or danger. This story gently explores the quiet rhythms of life as it once was, in the age of the cavemen, a slow, timeless existence carved into the stone of memory. What did cavemen actually do all day? What did their mornings feel like? How did they bond, struggle, sleep, or simply be before the weight of civilization took hold? In this 24-part journey, we'll follow a fictional Paleolithic clan across seasons, landscapes, and inner landscapes, told softly, step by step, as if whispered by the wind through ancient trees. So now, as the light dims and the hush of night draws near, find a comfortable place, close your eyes if you wish, and let us begin. The morning started as it always did, with silence and then with breath. A pale mist coiled lazily over the valley floor, softening the outline of the thorn bushes and the sloping ridge that rose beyond the forest edge. The trees, still shadows in the dimness, swayed almost imperceptibly in the windless hush before dawn. Beneath one of them, a wide, ancient beach, a small figure stirred. It was a girl, no more than 6 winters old, though nobody had ever counted. She rubbed her eyes with the back of her hand, her fingers rough and dusty from sleeping on packed earth, and looked toward the faint orange blush in the eastern sky. The stars, once fierce and cold above, had begun to fade. Morning had arrived. Around her, the rest of the clan slept, tucked beneath hides and woven grass mats, their bodies curved in instinctive shapes for warmth. There was no fire now. Fire was dangerous at night if left unguarded, its glow too visible, its crackle too loud. The embers from the evening lay hidden under a dome of stones, still faintly warm to the touch. The girl's name was not spoken often. Names in her clan were not for casual use. They were breathed only when truly needed, in ritual, in warning, or in love. For now she was simply the small one, or the quick foot, depending on who spoke of her. She crept to the edge of the sleeping circle and crouched low, watching. A few moments later, another shape moved, a larger one. A man, middle-aged by their standards, perhaps 30 winters old. His hair was thick, matted with streaks of dry mud from the night before. He stretched, slow and cat-like, bones cracking softly in the silence. Without a word, he knelt beside the stone dome and began uncovering the fire's core. With practiced fingers, he teased out the warmth from beneath the stones and fed it a twist of dry moss. Smoke curled upward, thin and blue. The girl crept closer, still wordless, still watching. This was how their days began. Not with alarms, not with to-do lists or tasks or screens, with quiet, with observation, with small ritual movements that were more felt than spoken. Soon, others stirred. A mother nursed a drowsy child while braiding her own hair with thin reeds. An elder, toothless and pale-eyed, coughed quietly into his hand and whispered something to the fire. 2 young men rolled to their feet, picked up short spears and leather slings and walked toward the creek, their bodies loose and alert like wolves. No one shouted, no one rushed. Time, here, moved not in hours, but in shadows. Later that morning, as the mist lifted and sunlight touched the edges of the ridge, the clan came alive in quiet motion. One woman shaped a bundle of willow bark into a rough basket. Another stripped fibers from a long root, twisting it between her calloused fingers to create cord. The elder hummed softly while sharpening a piece of flint on stone, not for hunting but for carving. A story was taking shape, though it would be weeks before the marks on the bone would resemble anything recognizable. The small girl was assigned to follow the older children. Her duty, like theirs, was to gather roots, berries, anything edible, anything useful. They were the scouts, the eyes close to the ground, and it wasn't without danger. She had seen a boy her age snatched by a large cat 2 winters ago. No one mentioned him anymore. His name was swallowed by the forest. As they walked, the girl noticed everything. A broken feather in the brush, the faint trail of snails glistening across a stone, droppings from a hair still fresh. Each detail was filed away, not in books or charts, but in memory, the living kind, handed from eye to mind to instinct. She didn't know the word pattern, but she lived inside one. By midday, the sun pressed gently on their backs and hunger returned. The hunters were not back yet. Their success was never certain. The group settled into a shaded hollow and chewed on dried meat and roots saved from the day before. The small girl sucked the marrow from a thin bone while listening to an old woman speak of rain. Not just about weather, about rain. How it fell differently when the spirits were pleased. How once a storm came not from the sky but from beneath the ground. Her words were half memory, half dream, but the rhythm of her voice soothed even the fidgeting children. The group didn't speak much of why. They spoke of when and where and remember. Time wasn't a line, it was a circle. And in that circle, every movement mattered. As the light turned golden and long shadows crept across the valley again, the hunters returned. One had blood on his thigh, but smiled anyway. A small antelope had been taken, enough to feed them all tonight, if shared carefully, and if nothing came to steal it. That evening, the small girl sat close to the fire, her belly full, her hair faintly smelling of smoke and wild mint. Above them, stars began to reappear, not as distant suns, not as scientific objects, but as watchful eyes. One of the older boys drew shapes in the dirt, trying to teach her the difference between the claw of a bear and the claw of a badger. She nodded solemnly, not yet understanding, but storing the lesson deep in her bones. And when the fire dimmed and the circle of bodies curled again on the earth, the small girl stared into the dark a little longer before sleep found her. Not from fear, not from dreams, but because the day had left a mark, quiet, soft, and unforgettable. The next morning would come without announcement, but so would the stories. And so the world turned. The wind whispered gently through the trees that morning, brushing the tops of the tall grasses like fingers over soft fur. A low mist still clung to the base of the valley, but the sky above was clear, an open blue canvas slowly warming as the sun reached higher. No birds sang yet, only the sound of insects humming and the occasional distant call of something moving in the underbrush gave voice to the silence. The small girl woke before most. She had begun to do this often, stirred not by noise but by an invisible tug inside her chest, something she did not yet have words for. She crept out of the circle of bodies and tiptoed to the edge of a small rise near the stream. Dew soaked her bare feet, and she crouched on a patch of stone warmed faintly from yesterday's sun. She sat still, watching. In the Paleolithic world, to watch was to survive. But there was more to it than that. The longer she watched, the more she saw. A fox pawing through last night's campfire ash, a spider gently wrapping its prey, a frog stirring ripples in the still water. Life didn't begin with action, it began with noticing. Behind her, the clan was beginning to stir. Quiet movements, soft breaths, the rustle of hides. One of the older women stretched her arms toward the sky and muttered something to herself, something sacred and old, passed down from the ones who came before. There were no formal prayers, but there were gestures, small rituals made of habit and meaning. Today was gathering day. The hunters would rest, having spent their strength the day before. That meant the others would move out in groups, searching, harvesting, watching the signs. The girl was assigned to go with Brun, a broad-shouldered man with a heavy brow and the gait of a limping bear. He was not a talker. Some whispered that he had once gone too far into the north woods and returned with his mind altered. Whether that was true or not didn't matter. He had a gift. He could smell tubers beneath dry soil, could find nuts hidden deep in squirrel caches, could tell if a mushroom would nourish or sicken just by the way it bent its stem. They moved together in silence, carrying woven satchels over their shoulders. The air smelled of wet leaves and the sweetness of distant blossoms. The sun dappled through the trees above, and everything shimmered like it was breathing. Brun stopped often. He'd tilt his head, sniff, crouch low, then move on. Once he paused before a tree whose roots rose like twisted knuckles from the earth. He made a low sound in his throat, touched the bark, then moved on without a word. The girl, unsure of what he had seen, tried to mimic his movements. She pressed her palm against the tree, closed her eyes. Nothing. But something inside her stirred anyway, something curious, something growing. Farther into the woods, they found wild onions, fat and pungent. They pulled them carefully, leaving some behind as always. Never take too much, never anger the spirits of the grove. That was the law, even if it was never written. Later, they reached a clearing where bees moved heavily through the air. Brun pointed to a broken tree, half fallen. and gestured with slow fingers. Inside, honey. Risky. Sweetness was never free. But Brun knew how to speak to the bees. He moved slowly, placed smoke near the hollow using a burning sprig of dry moss, and waited. The girl watched in awe. He did not kill them. He did not destroy the hive. Just enough honey to last a day or two, nothing more. He left behind a carved stone in the shape of a leaf wedged near the trunk, an offering, an apology, a thank you. They made their way back as the sun reached its highest point. Brun carried most of the load, not because the girl was weak, but because she had something else to carry, the learning. That was her weight. When they returned to the camp, others had arrived before them. Some had gathered roots and bitter greens. One pair brought fish, still flopping, caught with bare hands from a shallow bend in the stream. Another had only a handful of bark strips and fungi, but they were received with the same nods as the fish bearers. In this world, all effort mattered. That afternoon, the girl sat beside her mother and learned how to soften bark into a thread. It required patience, pounding, soaking, scraping. Her fingers ached. She failed more than she succeeded, but no one scolded. Failure was expected. Repetition was the teacher. In the distance, the older children played a game that mimicked the hunt. One child pretending to be prey, the others creeping through the underbrush like predators. Their laughter was rare, like sunlight breaking through clouds. But when it came, it echoed. Evening drew close. The smell of roasting meat mixed with the earthy aroma of wild onions. The small girl sat beside Brun as he carved lines into a long stick. It wasn't clear what the lines meant, or if they meant anything. But each stroke was deliberate, each notch made with thought. Perhaps it was memory, perhaps a message for someone not yet born. After they ate, the elders spoke. Not loudly, the stories were shared softly, as if they might drift away on the breeze if spoken too firmly. Tonight, the story was of the animal who had taught humans how to dig, a creature half mole, half spirit, who had tunneled through the world and whispered the location of every root to those who listened. Some smiled, some closed their eyes and listened like it was a lullaby. The small girl fell asleep with the rhythm of that story in her mind, and in her dreams the creature with dirt-covered paws showed her the secret places where food always grew, even in winter. Another day had passed, a day of watching, gathering, learning, and though it seemed small, it had been enough. The rain came quietly in the night, not a storm, just a soft, persistent drizzle that seemed to come from every direction at once. By morning, the ground was damp, and the air smelled of rich soil and moss. Mist hung in the trees again, but this time heavier, cloaking everything in a pale gray veil. The leaves above whispered with each drop, and water pooled gently in the hollows of stone. The small girl awoke beneath a damp hide, her hair tangled and beads of water clinging to her eyelashes. Her mother was already up, carefully moving their belongings beneath the overhang of a low rock ledge. Not far from the sleeping circle, others were doing the same, shifting bundles, retying roof coverings, and building shallow trenches to guide the water away from the center of their camp. Rainy days changed the rhythm. The hunters would not go far. Wet leaves masked sound, but wet ground left tracks, both given and taken. A hunt in rain was as much risk as reward. And so they stayed close, waiting for the weather to decide its mood. But not all work paused. In fact, rain brought its own kind of labor. The girl was sent to help gather wood, not the large pieces, but the dry kind hidden in the crotch of trees or beneath thick brush where water couldn't reach. She was partnered with Maya, a quiet older girl who rarely smiled but never missed a step. Together, they moved carefully, lifting fallen branches, stripping bark, and tucking the driest twigs into woven pouches. They barely spoke, but their silence was not empty. It was the silence of knowing. They shared glances, nodded when needed, and worked like two sides of the same hand. As they gathered, the forest around them seemed to breathe. Drops fell from high branches, echoing like distant footsteps. Once they both froze, a rustle, sudden and sharp. A deer perhaps, or something else? They crouched behind a boulder, listening. Nothing. Then a bird burst from the brush, flapping into the trees with a high cry. Maya exhaled. The girl hadn't realized she was holding her breath. They returned before midday, their pouches full. At the edge of camp, smoke curled from a small cooking fire that had been coaxed back to life. It took patience to light a fire in the rain, But patience was something the clan understood deeply. Fire was not owed, it was earned. That afternoon, the rain slowed to a drizzle, and the work changed again. Inside the rock shelter, several women and two of the older men began reshaping tools. Rainy days were perfect for mending and sharpening, for tasks that needed hands more than feet. A long bone was shaped into a fish hook. A broken spear was repaired with resin and fiber. Someone retwisted the bindings of a net used to catch birds in thickets. The small girl sat nearby, watching the process. She was handed a piece of red ochre and a flat stone. "Draw," one woman whispered. So she did. Not lines that meant something, not animals or people, just movement, circles and scratches and marks that pleased her eyes. She pressed harder in some places, lighter in others. The stone took the pigment like skin takes sunlight. It felt good, like remembering something you didn't know you had forgotten. When the woman saw her work, she only nodded. Later, as dusk fell and the rain slowed even more, the girl helped hang damp hides over low branches to dry. The sky had turned a deep purple and small birds began calling out again, testing the silence after the storm. The trees gleamed, slick and dark, and the air smelled clean in a way that made the chest feel light. That evening's meal was simple: boiled roots with smoked fish wrapped in broad leaves. No celebration, no feast, just food, shared warm. As night drew in, the group gathered close. The elder, who rarely moved far from the fire anymore, took a deep breath and began a story. Not one of spirits this time, but of an old hunt. A tale of a man who chased a deer for 3 days and 3 nights, never speaking, never resting, until the deer finally stopped and turned to face him. And in that moment, it bowed its head, not out of fear, but respect. The story was slow, the words soft, and yet no one interrupted. Even the smallest children stared wide-eyed, imagining the chase, the exhaustion, the silent understanding between hunter and prey. When the story ended, the fire cracked softly. A single spark jumped upward, vanishing into the dark. The girl looked up at the stars. They were back again, bright and sharp after the rain. She traced their patterns with her eyes, wondering if they told stories too, stories that no one had yet learned to hear. And as her eyelids grew heavy and her breath slowed, she dreamed not of fire or food, but of the deer that turned and bowed, of silence that spoke louder than words. Rain had come, rain had passed, and the rhythm of life continued, soft and strong. The morning after the rain was a quiet kind of golden. Mist no longer clung to the ground. It had lifted and drifted into the sky, leaving behind a world freshly washed and glistening. Drops of water still hung from the tips of leaves, trembling in the early light. The soil was soft, dark, and fragrant, and small birds darted from branch to branch, shaking moisture from their wings as they sang short, sharp notes into the stillness. The small girl woke slowly. Her body was warm beneath the hide, but the air beyond it was cool and damp. She stretched out her fingers and touched the earth beside her, wet but not cold, like the skin of a sleeping animal. Her breath steamed faintly in the morning chill. She sat up and looked around. Some of the clan were already moving. The fire had been rekindled and was burning low, and smoke twisted upward in thin columns that disappeared into the canopy. 2 boys crouched beside it, roasting something small, likely a squirrel or a bird caught in the net the day before. One of them whispered a joke, and they both laughed, the sound light and brief like a breeze brushing through tall grass. Today was not like other days. The elders had declared it a time of stillness, not a rest, not laziness, but something deeper, a tradition born of the land itself. After long rains, the earth needed to breathe, to settle. So did the people. No long travels, no hard labor, just presence. The small girl's mother sat near the edge of camp, weaving a mat from long reeds. She worked slowly, rhythmically, her fingers dancing with a memory older than words. The girl approached and sat beside her without speaking. For a long time they simply listened, to the sounds of the forest waking, to the soft creak of drying branches, to the rhythm of their own breathing. Then her mother handed her a bundle of reeds. "Try," the girl began clumsily. Her fingers didn't yet know how to bend the fibers without breaking them, how to hold one end with her toes while twisting the other. But she tried. Her mother did not correct her. She only watched, nodding when the pattern held, and gently touching the girl's wrist when it did not. Around them, others took part in the quiet labor of the stillness day. One man repaired the binding of a stone axe, wrapping sinew soaked in sap around the handle with delicate care. A pair of girls practiced throwing stones at a ring of wood, aiming not to win, but to improve. The elder who told stories the night before sat near the fire, not speaking this time, only staring into the flames as if searching for something not yet spoken. In the afternoon, the sky turned pale and hazy. A breeze carried the scent of pine and wet bark. The girl wandered to the edge of the forest where the world seemed larger. She knelt beside a tree and watched a trail of ants carry tiny fragments of leaves toward a dark hole. Each ant moved with purpose, never hesitating, never straying. She wondered what it would feel like to have such certainty, to know your path by instinct alone. But perhaps in her own way, she already did. Not far from her, a group of children gathered around an old woman who was showing them how to grind ochre into powder. The stone they used was worn smooth from generations of hands. The ochre was red, rich, and earthy. The girl moved closer, drawn by the motion. The old woman looked up. "Come," she said softly. The girl joined the circle. She was given a small stone and a flake of ochre. She began grinding. The color bloomed under her fingers, staining the stone and her skin. It smelled faintly of iron and dust, like time itself. As the sun began its slow descent, the colors around them deepened. The red of the ochre, the gold of the leaves, the green of the moss, all richer now, as if the world had taken a deeper breath. The girl looked at her hands, stained crimson, and smiled. Later, the entire clan gathered near the large flat rock at the edge of camp, the one used not for meals or tools, but for markings. Symbols, faces, shapes carved long ago and added to slowly, season by season. Tonight, a new mark would be made. Not by a hunter, not by an elder, by the girl. The old woman led her forward and placed a bowl of ochre in her hands. The girl looked at the rock, felt its cool surface, and dipped her fingers into the paint. She didn't know what to draw, so she didn't try to plan. She just let her hands move. What appeared was simple, a spiral, starting small, growing outward, like breath, like time, like her days in the forest, slowly unfolding. When she stepped back, no one clapped, no one cheered. They simply nodded. That was enough. As night fell and the fire returned to its center, the clan circled around. Not for story, not for food, but for silence. They watched the flames. They watched the stars. They watched one another. And in that stillness, something settled in the girl's chest. Something soft and wide and ancient. A knowing of belonging. Not because she had spoken, not because she had done anything grand, but because she had listened. Because she had been present. Because she had painted something from inside, and the world had received it. Another day had ended, and though it had been quiet, it had echoed. The morning came with birdsong, not loud, but layered and gentle, like the murmurs of 1,000 small voices greeting the day. The sky above was a deep, steady blue, touched with wisps of white drifting slowly eastward. The trees stood taller, it seemed, their leaves open wide, drinking in the sun after days of dampness. The forest was drier now, but the memory of the rain still lingered in the scent of moss and the softness of the trail. The small girl woke feeling different. Not changed in some obvious way, but more awake, as though her dreams had whispered something important. She couldn't remember what they had said, only the way they made her feel, full and still and bright like the sun behind closed eyes. She sat up and stretched. Her body ached a little from sleeping on uneven ground, but that was part of life. Everyone hurt somewhere, and no one made much of it. Pain was just a shadow that passed. Today, she was to follow the trackers. They were not hunters, not exactly. They were observers, quiet ones, who moved through the world without disturbing it. They read the earth like a story and could tell, from a broken twig or the way moss was crushed, who had passed, how fast, and why. There were 2 trackers in the clan. One was Ohan, tall, lean, with sharp cheekbones and a face that rarely moved. The other was Tema, shorter, broader, and always humming quietly under her breath, like she was speaking to the earth in a language only the roots could hear. The girl was told to stay behind Tema today. They moved out of camp just as the first sunlight broke through the treetops. No words were spoken. The trackers did not teach with speech. They taught with silence and with the expectation that you would notice. If you didn't, you would not be asked again. They moved slowly, and yet they covered ground quickly. The girl watched Timma's feet, how she stepped only on stone, how she leaned her weight just right to avoid snapping twigs. Her body moved with the forest, not against it. Soon they came across the first sign, a hoof print, shallow but clear, pressed into soft earth beside a small stream. Timma crouched low, her fingers hovering just above the mark. She did not touch it. She only looked, then moved on. The girl bent down too, trying to see what Timma had seen. The print was fresh, still wet around the edges. The soil hadn't had time to dry. The creature had passed recently, maybe within an hour, maybe less. A few steps later, broken grass. Then a smear of dark fur caught on bark. Timma paused again, then pointed toward a narrow path through the underbrush. No trail was visible, but something had gone that way. They followed. Time stretched thin. The girl forgot about hours or hunger. She forgot about her own footsteps. She became absorbed in the details. A turned leaf, a scent on the wind, a shadow where none had been. She wasn't sure what they were tracking anymore. A deer, a boar, a memory? But it didn't matter. The learning was in the following. Once they stopped at the edge of a small clearing. Timma raised a hand, stilling them. Across the space, half hidden in ferns, stood a young deer. Its ears twitched, its nose lifted. For a long moment, everything froze. Girl, tracker, deer, wind, time. Then the deer turned and vanished. Timma exhaled. The girl did too. They did not follow it. Not today, Timma said, the first word she had spoken since dawn. Instead, they sat beside a fallen tree and ate dry berries from a small pouch Timma carried on her belt. The girl chewed slowly, her body tired but buzzing with a quiet kind of joy, the kind that comes from being part of something vast and ancient and wordless. On the way back, Timma stopped and pointed to a patch of disturbed soil. Small holes, evenly spaced shallow. The girl knelt beside them. "Bird," she whispered. Timma smiled, not with her mouth, but with her eyes. By the time they returned to camp, the sun was already dipping toward the west. Smoke rose in lazy spirals from the cook fires. Children chased one another around a ring of stones. An old man sat carving bone, humming a tune too old to trace. The girl's mother was sorting herbs beneath the shade of a tree. She looked up as the girl approached and nodded. A silent question and a silent answer passed between them. That evening, after the meal was shared and the night fire was kindled, the girl sat alone near the edge of the clearing. She ran her fingers over the ground, tracing patterns in the dust. Not for others to see, just for herself. She thought of the deer, the silent path, the way the world spoke without speaking. And in her chest, a new understanding grew. Not loud, not sharp, but steady. A knowing that she too could learn to read the earth. That she was not just walking on it, but walking with it. The stars blinked awake above her, and a breeze stirred the trees. Somewhere in the dark, an owl called once, then again. The girl closed her eyes, and the world listened back. The days were beginning to lengthen. The sun lingered longer in the sky now, casting golden light that stretched deep into the evening, painting the leaves in warm amber and setting the stones aglow. The air had a new softness to it, a subtle shift that even the youngest among them could feel. It wasn't quite warmth, not yet, but it was promise. The first breath of the season that followed the rains. The clan had begun to speak of moving. They did not stay in one place forever. The earth gave, and the earth withdrew. It was a rhythm as old as bone. The berries would bloom elsewhere soon. Herds would move. Water would change its voice. And the people would follow. But not yet. There were still days of gathering ahead. And before the great movement, there was one more thing to prepare. The tools. This morning, the girl joined a group beneath the wide-limbed tree they called the Maker's Reach. It had stood for longer than anyone remembered, its bark gnarled and silvered with age. Beneath it, the ground was worn smooth by years of hands and work and waiting. Today, she was not gathering or tracking. Today, she would shape stone. The man who taught them was called Murak. His eyes were pale and his fingers were missing 2 joints on the left hand, lost long ago to some accident no one spoke of. But his hands, even as they were, moved with astonishing precision. Each stone he touched seemed to know what it wanted to become. He said little. His instructions were few. You strike too fast, it shatters. Too slow, it dulls. Listen to the stone, it tells you. She watched him demonstrate. He held a river rock in one hand and a rounded hammerstone in the other. With a motion that was not forceful but sharp, he struck the edge. A flake peeled away, smooth as a shell. Another strike, another flake. Slowly, a blade emerged, rough but sharp enough to part hide and meat. Then he handed her a stone. It was heavier than it looked, cool and speckled, with one edge already chipped. She positioned it as he had shown her, then raised the hammerstone. Her first strike missed entirely. The second barely scratched it. The third, it cracked down the middle. Marak said nothing. He simply handed her another. The work was slow, humbling, but there was a rhythm to it, a dance between pressure and patience. She began to hear it faintly, like the beat of a drum too far away to touch, but close enough to feel. When a flake came away cleanly, it brought with it a satisfaction deeper than any praise. It meant she had listened. Around her, others were at work too. Some shaped axes, others arrowheads. One girl near her age was making tiny bone needles, smoothing them with sandstone and threading them with sinew. No one hurried. No one spoke loudly. It was a kind of sacred hush. The silence of creation. By midday, her hands ached. Blisters had formed on her thumbs and her legs were stiff from sitting. But in her palm, she held a crude but usable blade. It was uneven, chipped too deep on one side, but it had an edge. It could cut. She offered it to Marak. He turned it over once, twice, then handed it back. "It is yours now," he said. "Let it teach you." That afternoon, the girl did not run or play. She sat by the stream, dipping her sore fingers into the cold water. Her blade rested beside her, catching the light. She picked it up and turned it in her hands, imagining the tasks it would see, scraping hides, carving bark, shaping meat. It was not just a tool, it was a promise, a symbol of doing. She thought of the deer again, of Temma's silence, of the ochre spiral she had drawn. All of it was connected. The watching, the shaping, the waiting. By evening, the scent of roasted tubers and wild herbs drifted through the camp. A stew bubbled gently in a carved stone basin heated by dropped-in firestones. The children whispered stories they half remembered, stories passed from older siblings, stretched and changed like soft leather. That night, the clan sang. Not often did they do this, only when something needed to be marked. A season turning, a birth, a leaving, or simply because someone felt the need rise up in their chest and offered it to the fires. The song had no beginning and no end. One voice began, low and slow. Then another joined, weaving through it. Then more, humming, echoing, rising and falling like waves. The girl listened, eyes half closed, the sound pulling something ancient from deep within her ribs, a part of her that had no name. She didn't sing, but she hummed, quietly, just to herself. And in that moment, she wasn't just a child listening to elders. She was a thread in the cloth, a spark in the flame, a voice, even if wordless, in the chorus of the world. When the fire burned low and the stars settled into their places, she lay on her side, her blade tucked near her, and dreamt not of things she didn't have, but of things she was slowly becoming. The wind shifted the next morning. It was subtle, not a storm, not a warning, just a turning. It carried with it the scent of drier earth and distant blossoms. Birds flew higher, more purposeful in their calls. The insects that had once hovered low now darted through sunbeams, weaving invisible threads across the morning air. The girl woke with a sense of movement already stirring in her bones. Not movement of the body, not yet, but of something unseen, something preparing. Around the camp, the mood had changed, though no one had declared it so. People moved with more focus. Hides were folded tighter. Tools checked, counted, bound with fiber. Bundles were tested for weight. A few children were asked to carry more than usual. They puffed their chests, proud, even though their legs trembled a little under the load. They were not leaving today, but the earth had spoken. Soon. The girl was told to stay close today, not to venture beyond the clearing, not to follow the trackers or the hunters. There was much to do, and she was old enough now to be useful in the work of staying. So she helped her mother and two others tan a hide, the thick pelt of a forest animal caught a week ago. It had hung drying for days, and now it was ready to be softened. They soaked it in water, pounded it with stones, scraped it clean of sinew and fat. The girl's arms ached with the motion, but she did not stop. Her hands were stained with oil, her fingernails packed with fibers. The smell was strong, earthy and sharp, but not unpleasant. It smelled like effort. When they rested, her mother told her that this hide would become a sleeping wrap for one of the elders who no longer walked with ease. We carry one another, she said, even when our legs no longer do. The girl liked that. In the afternoon, she was asked to join the gathering circle, where roots were being sorted and packed into woven baskets. Each bundle had to be wrapped in dry leaves, then tied with cordage, then labeled with a simple mark. Not letters, but lines and curves, a silent language that only the clan could read. The girl was given a mark to paint, a bent line, a short dash, and a curve beneath. It meant third day harvest, streamside. She repeated it carefully on each packet, using a piece of coal. She worked slowly, trying to make each one match the last. When one mark came out crooked, she wiped it off with a damp finger and began again. This was not decoration. This was memory, stored. Before the sun fell too low, the girl wandered to the edge of the nearby meadow where the clan had gathered water from shallow springs. The place was nearly dry now, another sign. The frogs that once sang loudly were silent or gone. The grass had yellowed at the tips. A bird circled high above, scanning for prey. All things in motion. She crouched beside the cracked mud and pressed her palm into it, leaving a faint print, a mark that would dry and fade and vanish soon. But for now, it was there. When she returned, she passed by the elder's shelter. The old woman who had guided her fingers with the ochre was resting beneath a woven canopy, wrapped in layers of hide. Her eyes were closed, but her lips moved slightly, mouthing words that only she could hear. The girl paused, watching. She didn't speak. She just stood still, like a listener in the forest, waiting to understand what the silence might say. Later, by the fire, the girl sat beside her mother, who was mending a sling made of twisted bark fiber. Across the circle, Mara carved something into a flat stone. Not a tool, something else. Maybe a map, maybe a memory. The girl took out her blade. It had already dulled a little. That was expected. Tools weren't meant to stay perfect. They were meant to be used, worn, reshaped, used again. She turned it in the light, then began scraping the bark from a long, smooth branch. She didn't know what she was making. Not yet, but her hands wanted to shape, so she followed them. As night settled and the stars emerged once more, the clan sat closer than usual. There was no song, no story tonight, just the low hum of preparation. Minds turning inward, hands busy with final tasks. Even the fire crackled more softly, as if sensing the mood. The girl felt tired, but it wasn't a heavy tiredness. It was the kind of tired that came from being part of something important. A slow, ancient machinery turning, and she was a gear in it, small, but needed. She lay down with her blade beside her, her fingers still marked with soot and bark and hide grease. Tomorrow would not be the same as today. She didn't know where the path would go, but she was ready to walk it. The day of the journey began before the sky had turned. Darkness still held the edges of the world when the first stirrings began. The quiet shuffling of feet, the soft creak of woven baskets lifted onto backs, the hushed whispers passed from mother to child. Fires were not relit. The embers were buried. Smoke would give them away. They would eat cold, walk long, and speak little. The girl woke to her mother's touch, light, firm, steady. She blinked up at the stars, still shining above her, and then sat up without complaint. Her bundle had already been prepared the night before. It lay at her feet, bound in hide, holding only what was needed. Her blade, some dried food, a spare wrap, and a piece of ochre wrapped in bark. No one asked if she was ready. You simply stood up and followed. She joined the line of quiet figures moving through the early gloom, stepping carefully over the worn earth. The clan moved in single file, each watching the heels of the one ahead. The youngest were placed in the center. The oldest, those who could still walk, were surrounded with care. Two were carried, bundled gently between poles, shifting only slightly with each step. There was no song, no farewell. The place they left would forget them, and they would forget its details in time. The land was not a possession, it was a rhythm. And now the beat had moved. The forest, as always, received them without question. Branches brushed shoulders, roots curled beneath feet. The air was cool and moist, and the light that filtered through the canopy was soft and blue, like the sky had not yet made up its mind to be day. The girl kept close to her mother, adjusting her bundle as it shifted, learning already how to walk long without losing breath. They traveled in pulses, walk, rest, walk again. At each stop, water was sipped carefully. Silence was kept. Only the trackers moved freely, veering off the main path to scan the edges for danger or signs of herd movement. Temma passed by once, glanced down at the girl's posture, and gave a faint nod. The girl straightened her back in reply, pride quiet and firm in her chest. By midday, the sun broke through the leaves in soft gold. The line of travelers curved down into a shallow valley where a stream wound its way between stones and tall reeds. There they stopped, not for camp, but to let the elders drink and rest. The children, even the youngest, stayed quiet. They knew this was not play. The girl knelt beside the stream and dipped her fingers into the water. Cool, sweet. She watched a beetle crawl along a stone, lifting its legs high as it walked over wet moss. Life went on, even in transition. She drank, wiped her mouth, and returned to her mother's side. They moved again, through thickets where thorns caught at hides, across fallen logs slick with moss, past trees marked with old carvings, spirals, crosses, animal tracks, signs that others had passed this way in seasons long gone. The girl reached out once and touched a worn mark on a trunk. Her fingers rested there a moment. She did not know its meaning, but it meant someone. As the light began to dim, the lead trackers called a halt. They had reached a rise, not high but wide, with stone underfoot and a view that opened across the treetops like a great green sea. Birds circled far below. Insects buzzed in the thickening air. This place would hold them for the night. The clan began to spread, to unpack. Fires were lit at last, small, smokeless, fed with dry moss and carefully tended. Food was passed hand to hand, strips of dried meat, pressed cakes of berries, a few precious nuts. The girl ate slowly, savoring each bite. Hunger had sharpened her awareness. Later, she climbed a small slope alone and sat at its edge, looking out over the forest. The horizon was a blur of shadow and light. Somewhere beyond it was their next place, the one where the earth would open and give again. She did not know what they would find. New plants, new prey, new dangers too. But that was not for her to fear. That was the shape of living. From her pouch, she pulled the ochre wrapped in bark. She had taken it not for trade or art or marking. She had taken it because it reminded her of the spiral she had once drawn, the first time the clan had asked her to leave a piece of herself behind. With a fingertip, she smeared a line of red across the stone beside her. Not a picture, not a word, just a mark, a presence, a proof. Then she leaned back and watched the sky. The stars were slow in coming. First one, then another. She counted 7 before the wind changed. Cooler now, brushing her cheeks with fingers that felt familiar. From below, her mother called softly. The girl stood, brushing the dust from her legs, and walked back toward the circle of flickering firelight. She did not look back. The land behind her had given what it could. Now, it was time to learn what the next would teach. The morning on the ridge was unlike the mornings before. There was no mist, no dew, no hush of dampness clinging to the trees. The air was dry and open, the sky already paling toward gold. Birds called loudly from all directions, as if announcing something too large to name. The wind moved freely here, unhindered by cliffs or thick canopy, and it carried with it scents that were new, flowers not yet named, the warm dust of sun-struck stone, the faint musk of large animals roaming not far off. The girl woke slowly, blinking against the brightness. For a moment she forgot where she was. The shapes of the trees were different, the sounds sharper, but then she saw her blade beside her and the familiar shape of her mother seated nearby, and the newness felt less like strangeness and more like invitation. Today would be a scouting day. Not all would go, just a few. The rest would wait on the ridge, tending tools, boiling what little water could be gathered, and watching the sky for signs. But a small group, led by Temma and 2 others, would move ahead to find the next possible place, not just for sleeping, but for settling, for staying longer. A place with water, shelter, food, and quiet. The girl was not chosen. She was still too young, but she was asked to help those preparing to go, to fetch binding fibers, sharpen blades, and carry a net woven of reeds and bone. She did so with care, knowing that each motion mattered. The trackers did not waste time. If she slowed them, she would not be asked again. Once the group had left, the rest turned to the work of waiting, not idle, but slow. Her mother and 2 others began gathering dry branches from beneath thorny shrubs. Wood in this place was twisted and gray, but when broken, it smelled sweet. The girl helped strip bark from a pile of branches and lay them in a pattern that would catch fire easily. She was learning to build fires not just for warmth, but for warning. Smoke in the right shape could be seen far across the hills. In the late morning, she was sent to gather insects. It was not punishment, it was learning. Insects, fat grubs, small beetles, and slow crickets were a source of food too often overlooked by those who dreamed only of big prey. But the clan had always known the truth. 1,000 small things fed you longer than one large one. They lived in bark, in understones, in the cool edges of roots. You had to be patient, careful, and respectful. She carried a small woven basket and a pointed stick. Under a flat stone, she found 3 beetles, glossy and slow. She took 2, left one. Near the base of a tree, she found a grub curled like a pale crescent. She placed it gently in her pouch, resisting the urge to squirm. Hunger quiets the mind. As she moved, she listened. The land here had a different voice. The rustle of the grass was drier, crackling like old fire. The birds' calls were more spaced, long silences between them, as if the air itself were holding its breath. She saw hoofprints too, large, recent. A herd had passed nearby. Elk, maybe, or something else. She did not follow. She only noted. When she returned, she brought what she had found, not much, but enough. The elders nodded. Nothing was wasted. In the quiet of the afternoon, a boy her age sat beside her and showed her how to shape reed into a snare. His fingers moved quickly, weaving and knotting. She tried, failed, tried again, succeeded. They didn't speak much, but she liked the way his eyes lit up when she got it right. Not pride, just acknowledgement. The sun dropped slowly, turning the ridge gold, then red, then gray. Still, the scouts did not return. This was not cause for fear, only patience. Tema had once vanished for 3 full days on a search. She had returned with hollow eyes and a story of following a river that split into 3, all wrong, until the last one gave her everything. But still, the waiting had weight. That night, the fires were small and the meals smaller. The girl chewed her food slowly, feeling its shape in her mouth. There was not enough to fill the belly, but enough to keep the fire inside burning. Her mother began humming softly, a tune the girl had heard in the cradle of her earliest dreams, a song not meant to be remembered, only passed. Others joined in, low, wordless, rising and falling like breath. The stars blinked into place above. The girl watched them, tracing the patterns she was beginning to know. She wondered if the trackers were looking at the same stars, wondering when the rest would follow. Sleep came easily, despite the hunger. She dreamed not of animals or tools, but of walking, always walking, across a land that unfolded endlessly in front of her. Not running, just walking, steady, sure. In the dream, she was not following anyone, she was leading. Dawn arrived without a sound. The sky, pale and clear, seemed to stretch endlessly overhead, free from cloud or mist. The world felt thinner somehow, not empty but wide. Every leaf's edge, every grain of dust, every shifting shadow under the trees stood out with perfect clarity, the kind of morning where the land itself felt alert. The girl rose early, before the others stirred. Her body was stiff, but her mind was sharp. She sat for a while, alone, watching the pale rim of the sun rise over the trees, its light catching the tops of the brush in quiet gold. Somewhere far off, a bird called out, not the high warble of the small singers, but a deeper cry, long and low. A voice from something large, moving. She didn't know what it meant, but she listened. By the time the others began to stir, she had already gathered water from the trickling stream down the slope. It was shallow, nearly dry, but still clear. She filled 2 skins and carried them back without spilling. Her fingers were cold and her shoulders ached, but she said nothing of it. The scouts returned just before midday. Tema walked at the front, dust on her arms, her face set and unreadable. Behind her came Ohan and the younger tracker, Kirun. All 3 moved with the pace of those who had seen far and thought deeply. When they arrived, the camp fell quiet. All eyes turned to them, but no one spoke. The custom was the same. The leader of the scouts would sit, drink, and only then speak. Tema knelt by the fire, took a small bowl of water, and drank slowly. Then she looked up. "There is a place," she said. 3 simple words, but they changed everything. She described it without flourish, a basin of dark soil and low stone, with a winding stream and trees shaped like reaching arms. The animals were few, but fresh tracks showed promise. The roots were thick, the bark soft, and the rocks good for building. She spoke of a long ledge overlooking the east, where the morning sun poured in like a flood. Shelter, water, light, and quiet. The people nodded. That afternoon, the clan moved again. The path was shorter this time, but steeper. They wound through narrow valleys, where the trees closed in tight and the air smelled of damp roots. The girl walked behind her mother, adjusting her bundle now and then, eyes scanning the path for signs she could name. She saw fox scat, crushed grass, the shed skin of a snake, half curled beneath a stone. All of it spoke. She was learning to hear it. When they reached the basin, it was late in the day. The place Tema had described was real, more real than the girl had pictured. The stream curled like a ribbon through dark earth. The stone ledge rose above the trees like a perch for the sky. Thick ferns grew along the edges, and birds darted between the branches, fearless. No words were spoken, no, but everyone knew. This would be home for a while. They moved slowly at first, placing stones to mark the center of the camp. Not a wall, a circle, a guide. Then the shelters were chosen. Low branches woven with hide and rope, new fires lit in safe places. Children helped gather kindling while elders rested against the rocks, eyes watching. The girl worked quietly. She helped smooth the floor of their shelter, pressing dirt into a soft, even surface. She gathered long grass for bedding, tied cords for hanging tools, and checked the edges of her blade. Still sharp, still hers. That night, the first fire in the new place burned high, a signal to the land and the sky that people were here now. The girl sat close to the flame, its heat warming her face and drying the sweat from her skin. Her mother sat beside her, silent but calm. Across the circle, Ohan carved something into bark, his hands steady. Tema sat with her back to the fire, eyes closed, as if listening for the breath of the land. No story was told, no song was sung, but the silence was full of belonging, of beginnings. As the fire dimmed, the girl lay back on the new earth, her body pressed to soil that had not yet known their steps. She felt the hum of it, deep, low, steady, a welcome. Above her, the stars shone sharp. She traced their shapes, remembering the lines she had followed during the long walk. But they looked different here, brighter, closer, clearer, as if the sky itself had moved with them and now rested here too. Before sleep took her, she whispered a single word, not to her mother, not to herself, but to the place. Here, a word of arrival, of stillness. And somewhere in the forest, the wind moved through the trees in reply, soft, slow, and endless. The days that followed were full of quiet labor. No one gave orders. There was no shouting, no barking of tasks. But everyone knew what had to be done. It was the way of things. A new place required new attentions, not just the body's work, but the spirit settling. You did not belong to a place simply because you slept there. You belonged because you gave something to it. Time, touch, silence. The girl spent her mornings at the stream. The water was narrow, but deep in places, running over smooth stones and through tangles of moss. She learned to watch for the slow movement of fish beneath the surface, small silver, darting like thought. They were not easy to catch. That was the lesson. Nothing worth eating came without patience. One morning, she was joined by the boy who had taught her the reed snare. He carried a basket and a net woven from fiber and bone. Together, they crouched by the edge of the stream and built a simple trap using forked sticks and a bend in the water's path. They did not speak much, but they moved well together, as if they had been doing this for longer than a few days. When they caught a fish, just one, they grinned without laughing. That night, the fish was cooked with herbs gathered by the old woman who never spoke above a whisper. Its smell drifted through the camp, drawing quiet nods of approval. No one feasted, but everyone tasted. The girl began to carve. It started with small things, not tools, but shapes. She used a piece of charcoal to draw patterns in the dust, then copied them onto bark with the point of her blade. Spirals, eyes, teeth. She didn't know what they meant, only that they wanted to be made. One evening, she carved a line of tiny trees into a flat stone near the water. No one noticed at first, but 2 days later, someone else had added marks beside it, stick figures holding hands. Another day passed, and a sun had been scratched above them. Then a line of animals, lopsided but recognizable, a deer, a bird, a snake. The stone became a message board, a song without sound. Children came to add their marks, Some traced their hands, others pressed leaves into clay and let them dry. A circle formed around the stone in the evenings, not for worship, not for rule, but for presence. In time, the girl began rising earlier than anyone else. She liked the world before it was awake. The air was cooler, the birds softer, the wind felt more honest. She would sit near the ridge that overlooked the east and watch the light stretch across the basin, inch by inch, as if the land was remembering itself. One morning, Tema joined her. The older woman didn't speak. She just sat beside her, hands folded, eyes on the same horizon. After a long while, she reached into her pouch and pulled out a thin strip of bark. Upon it were markings, lines, dots, scratches, arranged in a rhythm. She handed it to the girl. The girl studied it for a long moment. Then she looked at Tema. "Is it a story?" Tema didn't answer, but she nodded just once. The girl ran her fingers over the bark, slowly tracing the marks. She didn't understand it all, but something in her did. It was like learning a song you already knew how to hum. That evening, the girl made her own. On a strip of bark, she scratched a single curved line, then another crossing it. A spiral followed, and then a shape that resembled the fish she had caught. She folded it and placed it in the roots of the tree near their shelter. Not for keeping, for giving. The land too listened. The weather grew warmer. New leaves unfolded on the trees like open hands. The animals returned in greater number. Once, a herd passed near the stream, their hooves stirring dust and sound. The people watched in silence, eyes full. They would hunt when the time was right. But for now, they were content to watch. There was peace and stillness. The girl, once restless, began to walk slower. She lingered beside old stones, listening to what they might remember. She no longer feared the silence of the forest. It was not emptiness. It was a different kind of language, one she was slowly learning to speak. That night, as she lay beneath the stars, she traced the patterns again in her mind. Lines, shapes, stories. The ones drawn in stone, the ones drawn in bark, and the ones still unwritten, she could feel growing quietly inside her. The rain returned without warning. It came not in violent sheets, but in a steady, whispering fall, as though the sky had been holding its breath too long and finally exhaled. The leaves caught it first, trembling slightly, then the branches, then the soft, dark soil. By midday, everything had softened. The fire pits hissed under damp moss. Footprints vanished seconds after being made. But no one panicked. Rain was a visitor, not an enemy. The girl woke to the sound of droplets tapping the hide roof of their shelter, soft, rhythmic, constant. She lay still for a long time, listening. Her mother was already up, her outline barely visible through the misted entrance, working quietly to cover their baskets with bark sheets. Outside, the world had changed. Mist curled low to the ground, wrapping itself around the legs of trees and pooling in dips of the earth. The stream ran faster now, carrying leaves and fragments of broken twigs in its narrow current. The smell of the forest deepened. Wet bark, clean earth, crushed green. Everything felt closer. The sky, the trees, the bones beneath the soil. That morning, the camp moved slower. There was little gathering to be done in the rain. Instead, the people focused inward. Rope was checked for wear. Stones were polished. Hides were turned, stretched, and smoked under raised canopies. The girl helped stir a pot of acorn mash, thick and bitter, but nourishing. It clung to her fingers like wet clay. By midday, the rain had thinned to a drizzle. The girl wandered down toward the stream again, where the stone with the carving sat. Now slick and glistening, the marks etched into it made darker by the water. She crouched beside it and ran her fingers along the lines. The fish, the spiral, the crude sun. She added a new mark. A single, slanted line, like a path. She didn't know why, only that it wanted to be there. Behind her, someone approached. She turned to see Kieran, the younger tracker, holding a long, soaked branch. He didn't speak, but set it down and sat beside her. Together in silence, they carved. A shape that looked like a bird in flight, another spiral, a cluster of dots. Rain carved too, tiny rivers running through the lines, making them shimmer like veins. Later that day, the clan elders gathered near the central fire. There was talk of moving again. Not far, but farther upstream, where Tema had seen signs of caves, dry and wide, better for the rains that might linger longer than expected. The girl sat on the edge of the group, listening. One elder spoke of dreams, of water rising, of paths washing clean. Another remembered the last time rains had stayed too long and food had spoiled. They did not speak in fear, they spoke in memory. That night, the girl slept lightly. The sound of rain filled every corner of the world. Drops fell onto the roof, the stones, the trees, the very air. She dreamt of walking alone through mist, her blade in one hand, her other brushing leaves that whispered her name. When she awoke, she was not afraid, only alert. The next morning they moved. It was not a great exodus, not like the one that had brought them to this basin. It was smaller, quieter. They left the shelters behind, knowing they might return. They followed the stream's curve, stepping carefully over wet roots, keeping close together. The girl carried a light bundle, her blade, a pouch of mash, a damp strip of bark marked with her latest carving. They reached the caves by midday. They were not large, but they were dry, with high overhangs, walls blackened by time and smoke, and floors of packed earth and gravel. Inside, the air was still and cool, smelling of stone and old fire. The clan entered slowly, with reverence. The girl explored quietly, her footsteps muffled. In one corner, she found a section of wall smooth and pale, a canvas. She drew there, not with ochre, it was too damp, but with her fingers tracing lines into the thin coat of mud that had settled on the stone. A shape like a path, a line of dots, a handprint. She pressed it firmly, then pulled away. There it was, a mark, a belonging. Others came, not to watch, but to join. The wall filled slowly, not with words, but with presence. Fingers, lines, symbols, circles. Some new, some old, some repeated again and again as if they meant something too deep for voice. The girl stepped back, watching the light from the entrance shift across the surface. She understood now. The clan didn't just carry tools or baskets or knowledge. They carried memory in every step, every touch, every mark left behind on bark, on stone, on skin. And this wall would remember them long after the rain had stopped. The days inside the cave stretched longer than expected. Outside, the rain continued, gentle, steady, endless. Not a storm, but a presence. A veil drawn across the forest, softening every edge, quieting every trail. It filled the stream until it spilled over its banks. It darkened the trunks of trees until they looked like sleeping giants. It soaked the ground so deeply that every footstep left a memory. But within the caves, the people moved slowly and without fear. They adapted, as they always did. The girl woke each morning to the muted drip of water near the cave entrance. She would lie still for a moment, watching the play of light across the wet stone ceiling, flickers of firelight, shadows shifting like slow dancers. Then she would rise, roll up her bedding, and begin the day's silent rhythm. Space was shared here. There was no room for wandering. Every breath echoed. Every motion belonged to the group. So they learned to live inside each other's sounds. The rustle of a basket, the crunch of dried root, the snap of a flint against stone. No one raised their voice, but everything was heard. One morning, the girl was given a task. Not a great one, just a small thing. She was told to help dry the roots gathered days earlier, spreading them near the fire, turning them carefully so no rot creep in. But her hands moved carefully, as though the task were sacred. She understood by now. It was. Each root was a story of someone's steps, someone's eyes, someone's patience. A forgotten root meant hunger, and so she handled them like they were alive. Later that day, she sat beside an elder named Mena. Mena was slow to move, but quick to see. Her hair was long and white, tied in a knot behind her head. Her hands trembled when idle, but not when working. She was shaping bone into a needle, smoothing it with a strip of sandstone. "Do you know how to mend?" she asked, voice low. The girl shook her head. Mena handed her the bone, then began. And so she did. She learned how to stitch hide to hide, thread to edge, with patience and care. Her first knot slipped, her second tore the edge. But Mena only nodded and passed her another piece. "Again," she whispered, "until your hands stop thinking and your mind becomes quiet." By evening, the girl had made 5 stitches that held. Mena didn't praise her. She simply handed her a folded bundle and said, "Carry this to the boy by the fire." The girl obeyed. And with every step, she felt something different in her. Not pride, not excitement, but a new kind of calm. A kind that grew only when the hands were busy and the heart was steady. That night, the cave was filled with movement. Not loud, but full. One of the trackers had returned from a path higher up the ridge and brought back something rare, dry moss, and a pouch of beeswax found tucked inside a hollow log. It was passed around, examined, revered. The wax would seal baskets, preserve cord, bind wounds. It would be used well. A small fire was lit near the mouth of the cave, where the smoke would drift out and not smother them. Around it, the elders told stories, not with long speeches, just phrases, bits of memory, half-finished tales that someone else would pick up and continue. The river that carved its own mouth. The wolf that walked with two shadows. The boy who lost his name and found it in the eyes of a bear. The girl listened, eyes wide. She didn't ask for more. She knew now that stories were not fed in full. They were tasted, chewed, and carried forward until they became part of your own steps. Later, as sleep began to wrap itself around the camp like fog, the girl crept toward the wall of markings once more. It had grown crowded, layer upon layer of shapes, hands, and moments. She found a small space near the edge, where the stone curved just slightly inward, a hollow. There she drew a simple figure, a circle for a head, two long lines for legs, one raised arm reaching not forward but upward toward a star she marked as a dot above. It wasn't for anyone else. It wasn't even for her. It was simply there. A part of the wall now, a part of the place, a part of the long remembering. And as she stepped away and returned to her place beside her mother, she felt it behind her, still there even with her back turned, like a heartbeat in stone, like a whisper in the rain, like something very old learning her name. The sky cleared at last, not with a shout or a blaze, but with a quiet lifting, as if the clouds, weary of their long watch, had simply stepped aside. For the first time in many days, light poured through the trees outside the cave, warm and golden, touching the wet earth and turning into steam. The forest exhaled, and the people stirred. No one rushed, no one called out in celebration, but something unspoken passed between them, a shared breath, a loosening of shoulders, a tilt of heads toward the sun. They stepped from the cave one by one, blinking like animals emerging from hibernation. The girl stepped out barefoot. The ground was soft, spongy beneath her toes, still damp but no longer cold. Drops of water fell from high branches in gentle rhythm, like the final notes of a long song. Above, patches of blue sky shone through the canopy, unfamiliar after so many days of gray. She walked slowly, not far, just enough to feel the space return around her, enough to smell green things again, leaves and bark, crushed stems and moss. The air held a scent she had almost forgotten, light warmed by life. Around her others began to move, not to leave, not yet, but to stretch outward, to forage, to hunt, to touch the land again after so many days of only looking at it. The girl helped gather small branches knocked down by the rain. She peeled bark from one, revealing tiny beetles beneath. She returned them to the ground gently. Later that morning, she followed her mother along a narrow path lined with stone and creeping vines. They moved uphill, past the old stream now swollen, toward a cluster of trees that grew in a circle. Trees her mother called listening trees. "They always come back after rain," she said. "You'll hear." The girl didn't ask what she meant. They arrived at the clearing and stood silently. Nothing at first, only the faint sigh of wind moving through the canopy. Then a single knock, a soft thump, then another and another. The branches moved against each other. The trunks shifted and the forest began to speak. Not words, not language, but something older, a rhythm. The girl closed her eyes and leaned her ear to the nearest trunk. She didn't expect anything, but then in the silence between sounds, she felt something, a thrum, low and deep, like the ground remembering its own weight. When they returned, the others were preparing to leave the cave. Not forever, but for longer stretches. The weather was changing, and the land had offerings again. The animals would return to their trails. The plants would grow thicker. Movement was returning to the world. The girl was chosen to help scout. It was her first time. Timma handed her a wrapped bundle, a strip of dried meat, a piece of charred wood for marking, and a simple reed whistle. "Use this only when you can't use your voice," she said, "and only when you must be found." The girl nodded. She didn't speak, but her hands felt steady. She was paired with Kirun. He carried a longer blade and a pouch of fire dust, the kind that sparked when struck just right. Together they moved east, where the trees thinned into sloped ground and the air began to carry the scent of dry grass and wild mint. They walked for hours. They did not speak unless needed. But in their silence, a language grew, in gestures, in glances, in the way they placed their feet or pointed toward a snapped branch. The girl began to see things she wouldn't have noticed before. The curve of a feather on a rock, the fresh scrape of antler against bark, the hollow left by a sleeping animal. They found a clearing near sunset. It opened wide beneath an ancient tree, massive, gnarled, half dead but still standing. Around it grew young shoots, as if fed by its roots. The space was dry, high, safe. They rested there. The girl lit a small fire, shielding the sparks with her body until the flame took. Kira nodded, impressed. They shared the dried meat in silence, watching the sky change from pale gold to a deep, heavy blue. She did not know what would come next, whether the others would join them, whether this place would become another home. But she felt no fear, only presence, only the warmth of fire against her knees and the memory of water on stone and the sound of trees knocking gently in the wind. That night, beneath the stars, she drew again, not on bark, not on stone, but in the soil with the tip of a stick, a wide line for the river, a spiral for the wind. Two figures side by side, walking forward. When the fire dimmed and the earth cooled, she let the drawing remain, not to keep, but to give. The dawn came quietly, soft and slow, like a gentle breath settling over the land. The girl awoke with the first light filtering through the sparse leaves above their new camp. Her body ached in ways that spoke of movement and growth, and she welcomed the feeling. Each ache was a mark of survival, a testament to the steps taken, the work done, the lessons learned. Outside, the world was waking too. Birds called out in low, cautious songs. The wind stirred the grasses and bent the young trees. The scent of earth and fire mixed in the air, thick and familiar. The girl rose, careful not to disturb the others still wrapped in sleep or dreams. Her mother was already near the fire, tending embers from the night before. The small flame flickered stubbornly, fighting to grow. The girl joined her, hands moving to gather dry twigs and lay them gently into the hearth. There was no rush, only patience. Today was a day for hunting, not the kind that sent the whole clan rushing into the woods with sharpened spears and shouted calls. This was quieter, more deliberate, a task for the trackers and scouts to find the animals that fed them, to follow trails that only the patient could read. The girl was not yet part of the hunting party, but she was learning to track. She walked behind the elders, watching how their eyes never rested, how their fingers brushed leaves and dirt, how their feet found the softest paths without sound. She learned to read the world in signs, broken twigs, bent grass, footprints pressed into the mud. As they moved through the forest, the air felt alive. A sudden rustle startled a small bird from its perch, and the girl held her breath, watching as it took flight in a burst of wings and light. Nearby, the scent of something stronger caught her attention, musk, warm and raw. She glanced up to see a large elk moving slowly through the trees, its antlers brushing against branches, eyes calm but alert. The hunting party paused. No one made a sound. The girl felt her heart quicken, both with fear and awe. They followed the elk's path cautiously, marking signs along the way with small scratches on bark and bent leaves. Hours passed, and the sun rose high, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow. At midday, they reached a clearing. It was a place where the grass grew tall and the soil was soft. The elk had stopped here, leaving fresh droppings and the scent of sweat. The trackers knelt, inspecting the ground, then exchanged quiet words. The girl watched closely, absorbing the knowledge like a sponge. They did not hunt that day. Instead, they waited. Patience was a hunter's tool as much as the spear. As the afternoon waned, the girl wandered slightly from the group, drawn by a cluster of wild berries hanging low from a bush. She reached out, plucking a few ripe ones and tasting their sweetness. The juice was sharp on her tongue, a burst of life in the quiet. Suddenly, a noise came from the far edge of the clearing, a low growl, barely audible, but unmistakable. The group tensed. Eyes darted toward the sound. The girl froze. From behind a thicket emerged a large wolf, its coat mottled and eyes glinting with intelligence. It paused, watching the humans with a calm that felt ancient. The girl held her breath, feeling the weight of its gaze. The wolf did not move closer. It simply stood, a moment of mutual recognition passing between them, two creatures of the wild, sharing the same space, respecting the boundaries of survival. Then, without warning, it turned and vanished into the forest. The girl exhaled slowly, relief washing over her. The elders smiled faintly, nodding as if understanding some unspoken truth. The hunt would continue, but so would the stories of wolves watching from shadows, of paths crossing, and of the delicate balance between fear and respect. As they made their way back to camp, the girl felt a deepening connection to the land, not just as a place of survival, but as a living, breathing presence. Each day brought new lessons, new encounters, and a growing sense of belonging. That night, beneath a sky heavy with stars, she traced the wolf's shape in the dirt near the fire. A simple figure, bold and proud. A mark of respect, a memory given back to the earth. The morning was calm, wrapped in a soft haze that blurred the edges of the trees and softened the light. The girl awoke slowly, her limbs heavy from the previous day's exertion, but her mind sharp, tuned to the rhythm of the world around her. The camp was quiet, the usual morning bustle subdued, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. She moved carefully, not to disturb the small flames still flickering in the hearth, and stepped outside. The air was cool and damp, filled with the scent of wet leaves and the faint, sweet aroma of wildflowers pushing through the undergrowth. Her mother was already awake, crouched by the fire, shaping a new spear from a straight branch stripped of its bark. The wood was smooth and pale in the soft light, its tip sharpened carefully against a stone. The girl watched silently, learning the practiced movements that came from years of repetition. The way her mother's hands never trembled, the patient pressure applied with precision. Today, she would join the hunt. It was the first time. Tema had chosen her, not because she was the strongest or the fastest, but because she had learned to move quietly, to observe without needing words, to respect the land and its creatures. The hunting party gathered shortly after dawn, their faces set with quiet determination. Each carried a spear, a small bundle of dried meat, and the tools needed for survival: flint for fire, strips of hide for bandages, and baskets woven tightly to carry what they found. They moved as one, stepping softly through the forest, following trails marked by broken branches and crushed grass. The girl felt the weight of every step, the silent conversation between the earth and her feet. As they reached a ridge overlooking a wide valley, the scent of the hunt grew stronger. Fresh tracks marked the soft soil, deer, boar, and smaller creatures scurrying in the underbrush. The girl knelt, tracing the prints with her fingers, committing them to memory. The elders whispered strategies, their voices low and purposeful. They spoke of patience, of waiting for the right moment, of honoring the animal even in the act of taking its life. Hours passed in quiet anticipation. The sun climbed higher, casting shifting shadows through the leaves. Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced the stillness, a signal from one of the scouts. The group tensed and spread out, moving swiftly but cautiously toward the sound. There, in a small clearing bathed in sunlight, stood a young boar, its bristles bristling with alertness. The hunting party circled carefully, cutting off escape routes and closing in with practiced precision. The girl's heart hammered as the moment approached. When the spear was thrown, it flew true. The boar fell with a sudden thud, the forest seeming to exhale with the end of the chase. The girl stepped forward, reverent and silent. She helped to secure the animal, learning how to prepare it for the journey back. The others worked together, speaking softly, sharing knowledge passed down through generations. As they made their way home, the girl felt a strange mixture of pride and sorrow. The hunt was necessary, survival demanded it, but it was also a solemn act, a giving and receiving between life and death. Back at the camp, the animal was carefully butchered, then its meat divided and stored with care. The bones would be used for tools, the hide for clothing and shelter. Nothing was wasted. That evening, as the fire burned low and the stars emerged one by one, the girl sat beside Tema. The elder placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent blessing and acknowledgement. The girl traced a new symbol in the dirt, a spear crossed with a leaf, a sign of respect for the balance of taking and giving. The forest was both harsh and generous, and the girl was learning to walk its fine line. The night settled softly over the camp, folding the world in deep blues and quiet shadows. The fire flickered low, sending embers drifting upward like tiny glowing spirits. The clan sat close, wrapped in furs and silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The girl leaned against a smooth stone, her hands resting in her lap, feeling the warmth of the fire seep through the coolness of the night. Above, the stars whispered secrets. She traced patterns in the dirt with a slender stick, spirals, lines, dots, the same marks that had been drawn on bark, stone, and walls throughout their journey. These marks were stories, memories, echoes of those who came before and those who would come after. Tema sat beside her, breaking the silence with a voice low and steady. Stories live in the marks we leave, she said. They hold the past and carry us forward. The girl nodded, feeling the truth of the words settle inside her like a seed. Far from the fire, the wolves howled, a long, haunting song that rose and fell with the breath of the night. The sound was neither frightening nor lonely, but a reminder of the wild heartbeat of the world beyond their shelter. She thought of the wolf they had seen days before, standing at the edge of the clearing, a creature both fierce and wise, a symbol of survival and spirit. The girl's fingers tightened around the stick, and she began to draw a new symbol, a wolf's head, its eyes watching, its mouth open in a silent howl. The firelight danced on the shapes as she worked, and for a moment, the boundary between earth and sky, past and present, felt thin, as if the stories themselves breathed alongside her. When the drawing was complete, she leaned back, eyes lifted toward the stars. She saw constellations, patterns ancient and familiar, and imagined the stories they told long before her time, a path traced in light. Tema's voice broke the quiet again. Remember, child, every mark, every story is a thread in the web of life. We are all connected, to each other, to the land, to the spirits who watch. The girl felt a swell of understanding. The clan was more than a group of people. They were a living story, written in stone, bark, and memory. Every step taken, every animal hunted, every mark drawn was part of a greater whole. The night deepened, the fire faded to glowing coals, the stars shone brighter, and the girl, wrapped in the quiet strength of belonging, closed her eyes, ready to dream new stories, stories that would live long after her. And somewhere in the dark, the wolves howled again, their voices weaving through the trees like a timeless song of life, survival, and connection. Morning broke gently over the forest, the pale light filtering through leaves heavy with dew. The air was cool and carried the faint scent of moss and wet earth, a reminder of the rain that had passed days before. The girl stirred from her sleep, the quiet hum of the waking world pulling her from dreams woven with shadows and light. Outside the shelter, the clan moved with purpose, preparing for a journey beyond the familiar paths. The elders spoke softly among themselves, their voices carrying the weight of decision and experience. Today, they would explore deeper into the forest, searching for new grounds where food was plentiful and water flowed steady. The girl gathered her small pack, securing the tools she had crafted, her blade, a pouch of dried roots, a piece of sharpened bone, and wrapped a strip of bark etched with symbols that told the story of their journey so far. It was her talisman, a map of memory and hope. She walked beside Kirun, their footsteps nearly silent on the soft forest floor. The canopy above formed a living mosaic of light and shadow, shifting with the breeze as birds sang hidden melodies. The world felt alive in every sense, the rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of water, the scent of wild herbs. They moved slowly, eyes attentive to the signs that nature left behind. A broken branch here, a patch of disturbed soil there, each a clue to the movements of animals, the rhythm of the land. The girl's heart beat in time with the forest, each step a conversation between her and the earth. At midday, they reached a clearing where wild berries grew in thick clusters, their bright colors contrasting with the green around them. The girl picked handfuls, tasting the sweet and tart flavors, storing some for the journey back. She noticed faint tracks leading toward a thicket, the impression soft but recent. Following the trail cautiously, they came upon a small family of deer grazing peacefully. The animals lifted their heads, nostrils flaring, eyes alert but unafraid. The girl felt a swell of respect and wonder. Here was life continuing, delicate and wild. They stayed at the clearing until the sun began its descent, casting long shadows and bathing the forest in warm amber. The return journey was quiet, each step measured and mindful. The girl carried not just the berries and tools, but a growing sense of connection to the land, to her people, and to the stories that wove them all together. As night fell, the clan gathered around the fire once more. Flames flickered against the dark, and the air was thick with the scent of cooking meat and smoke. The girl traced new symbols in the dirt, berries, deer, and the winding path they had followed, adding to the tapestry of marks that held their memories. The elders shared tales beneath the stars, their voices low and rhythmic, echoing the pulse of the earth. The girl listened, feeling herself becoming part of the endless story. A story not just of survival, but of belonging, of life breathed into stone, bark, and soul. And as the fire's glow faded into embers, the girl closed her eyes, carrying the forest's song within her, a quiet promise that the journey would continue, guided by the marks left behind the whispers of the wild. The night air was cool and still, wrapping the camp in a blanket of quiet shadows and faint scents of pine and earth. The girl lay near the dying embers of the fire, her thoughts drifting as the stars above blinked gently into existence. Around her, the clan slept in the deep hush that only the wild could offer, broken only by the occasional crackle of cooling wood or the soft breath of a child. She reached out and brushed her fingers across the rough bark of the nearby tree, feeling the grooves and ridges beneath her touch, each one a testament to seasons past, storms weathered, and silent growth. In the stillness, the girl remembered the stories told by the elders, tales woven with voices that seemed to carry the weight of centuries, of ancestors who walked these lands before her. Her thoughts wandered to the paths they had traveled, the caves that sheltered them, the rivers that fed them, and the skies that watched over them all. Each step, each mark left behind, whether on stone, hide, or in memory, was part of a greater tapestry, a thread in the fabric of life that stretched beyond her understanding but filled her heart with belonging. As the moon rose higher, casting silver light over the forest floor, she thought of the wolf's howl that had echoed through the trees, a sound both wild and hauntingly familiar. It was a reminder of the delicate balance between hunter and hunted, the respect between creatures who shared the same breath of earth and sky. Slowly the girl rose, careful not to disturb the sleeping forms around her. She moved toward the edge of the camp where the shadows deepened, and knelt to trace patterns in the soft soil with a slender stick. A spiral here, a line there, the shape of a paw print followed by a set of human footprints. Each symbol was a silent prayer, a remembrance, a hope. She paused and looked up at the night sky, the stars shimmering like distant fires. Somewhere beyond the canopy, the wind stirred gently, carrying the scent of pine and moss and the faintest hint of rain. The girl closed her eyes, breathing in the wildness of the world, feeling herself connected to everything, the land, the creatures, her clan, and the endless sky above. And as the night wrapped around her like a whispered promise, she understood that the journey was far from over. Each day brought new challenges, new lessons, and new stories waiting to be told. In every mark she made, in every step she took, the past and future met, woven together in a silent song of survival, memory, and hope. With a final breath, she rose and returned to the warmth of the firelight, ready to face whatever the dawn would bring, carrying the stories of the earth within her heart. The dawn arrived with a soft, golden glow that filtered through the trees, casting gentle light over the waking world. The girl stirred once more, feeling the steady pulse of life around her, the rustling leaves, the distant call of birds, the quiet murmur of the stream nearby. Each morning was a new beginning, a fresh page on which the story of survival and connection was written. Today, the clan prepared to move, not in haste, but with intention and care. Their shelters were broken down, their belongings packed into bundles secured with woven cords. The girl helped her mother fold hides and tie them neatly, the familiar movements both soothing and purposeful. The elders spoke softly of the path ahead, one that would lead them through denser forest and across rocky ridges toward a valley said to hold abundance. It was a place spoken of in stories, where the earth was rich and the waters flowed clear. As they set out, the girl felt the weight of their journey settle into her bones. Each step was a rhythm, a beat in the dance of life. The forest greeted them anew, the scent of pine mingled with wildflowers, the dappled sunlight played upon the ground, and the songs of unseen creatures wove through the air. The path was not easy. Roots curled like sleeping serpents beneath their feet, stones jutted sharply, and the incline tested their strength. Yet the clan moved steadily, their pace steady and sure. Along the way, they paused often to gather edible plants, to listen for the sounds of game, to mark the trail with small carvings on bark and stone. The girl's hands were busy, her fingers tracing symbols into the soft bark of a fallen branch. A spiral for the journey, a set of lines for the river they would cross, a crescent for the moon that guided their nights. As the sun climbed higher, they reached the ridge's edge and looked down into the valley below. It stretched wide and green, a tapestry of trees and meadows, threaded with sparkling streams that caught the sunlight like scattered jewels. The air was rich with promise, alive with the hum of life and possibility. The clan descended carefully, their spirits lifted by the sight and the hope it carried. They chose a clearing near the water, where the earth was soft and the shelter of trees embraced them like an old friend. Camps were soon built, fires lit, and the rituals of arrival began. Gathering, preparing, sharing. That evening, as the stars blinked awake in the velvet sky, the girls sat beside Tema, their hands joined. Together they carved a new symbol into a smooth stone, a winding path leading to a cluster of dots like footsteps toward a distant home. It was a mark of arrival, of survival, of the endless story carried forward in each breath, each step, and each whispered memory. And as the night wrapped around them, the girl felt a deep peace settle within, a quiet knowing that wherever the path led, they were part of something timeless, bound to the earth, the sky, and the stories yet to be told. The morning light spilled softly over the valley, warming the dew-kissed grass and stirring the life that had long awaited their arrival. The girl awoke beneath a canopy of leaves, their gentle rustle a soothing lullaby that had become familiar and dear. Around her, the clan stirred, their movements slow but purposeful, each embracing the rhythm of a new home. Today was a day of discovery. After the simple meal shared around the fire, berries, roasted roots, and fresh water, the elders gathered the clan, speaking in low tones about the land's gifts and challenges. The girl listened closely, absorbing the wisdom in their words, the stories woven through generations that guided their steps. Tema handed her a small bundle, a collection of sharpened stones, strips of hide, and a slender branch carved with ancient symbols. "These will help you learn," Tema said softly, "to honor the land, to protect our people." Together, they ventured into the thick woods bordering their new camp. The forest here was dense and alive, a tapestry of green shadows and vibrant sounds. The girl's senses heightened, the crunch of leaves beneath her feet, the distant call of a hawk, the subtle scent of wild herbs carried on the breeze. They paused at a stream, its waters clear and cold. Tema knelt and cupped the water, drinking deeply before offering some to the girl. The taste was fresh, a gift of the earth itself. As they continued, Tema showed her how to read the signs, broken twigs that marked animal trails, the pattern of moss growth that hinted at north, the way the wind whispered through the branches. Each detail was a lesson in patience, observation, and respect. The girl practiced shaping small tools from stone and wood, her hands growing steadier, more confident. She learned to weave strips of bark into sturdy cord, to create simple traps for small game, and to prepare medicinal plants with care. Throughout the day, stories were shared, tales of ancestors who had walked these lands, of the cycles of seasons in life, of the spirits that dwelled unseen but ever present. When the sun began to dip low, casting golden light through the trees, they returned to camp. The girl carried with her not just the tools, but a deeper understanding, a thread connecting her to the earth, her people, and the timeless dance of life. That evening, around the fire's glow, she traced new symbols into the soft earth, tools, water, trees intertwined with shapes that spoke of growth and protection. Tema smiled, her eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "You carry the story forward," she said. "In every mark, every step, every breath." The girl felt a quiet strength settle within her, a promise to honor the past, embrace the present, and step boldly into the future. And as the night deepened, the stars shining bright overhead, she closed her eyes, ready to dream new stories, stories woven from stone and sky, earth and spirit, survival and hope. The first light of dawn filtered through the branches, casting soft patterns of gold and green across the forest floor. The girl rose quietly, feeling the familiar ache of muscles still learning the ways of the wild, a reminder of the journey she had undertaken, and the growth unfolding within her. The camp was stirring gently. Voices were low, movements careful as the clan prepared for another day, shaped by the land's rhythms. Today, they would venture farther than before, seeking the edges of their new home, places whispered of in stories but not yet seen. Tema gathered the group, her voice steady and calm, weaving instructions with lessons of respect and caution. The land holds both gifts and dangers, she said. We move with care, watching, listening, always ready. The girl felt a mix of anticipation and calm as they stepped beyond familiar paths. The forest grew thicker, the air dense with the scent of pine, earth, and moss. Light filtered through in shafts, illuminating ferns and wildflowers that bent gently beneath the breeze. They followed a narrow trail marked by worn stones and faint scratches on tree trunks. Along the way, the girl noticed small details, a bird's nest tucked high in the branches, a patch of mushrooms clinging to a fallen log, the delicate tracks of a rabbit pressed into soft soil. Tema pointed out plants with leaves shaped like stars, their roots used to ease aches and fevers. She showed how to identify water sources by the way certain grasses leaned, and by listening for the faint murmur of streams hidden deep in the woods. At midday, they reached a wide clearing where sunlight bathed a cluster of wild herbs. The clan paused to gather, careful not to disturb the delicate balance. The girl plucked leaves and stems, storing them gently in her woven basket, mindful of the earth that gave them life. As they rested, the elders shared stories of past journeys, of spirits seen and unseen, of lessons learned from the animals that roamed the land. The girl listened intently, feeling the weight of tradition settle into her bones. The afternoon brought a gentle rain, the kind that kissed the skin and mingled with the scent of wet earth. The clan took shelter beneath broad leaves and fallen trees, waiting patiently as the forest seemed to hold its breath. When the rain passed, the air was fresh and alive, droplets clinging to leaves and stones like tiny jewels. The girl knelt to trace new symbols in the softened soil, a leaf, a raindrop, a winding path, each a part of the story they were writing together. As twilight deepened, they returned to camp, the sky painted in hues of pink and purple. Fires were rekindled, meals prepared, and the night filled with quiet conversation and laughter. The girl sat close to Tema, sharing the warmth of the fire and the comfort of belonging. Her heart was full, of knowledge gained, of stories told, and of the unspoken promise that the journey would continue, guided by the land's whisper and the strength of those who walked its paths. And beneath the vast sky, alive with stars, she dreamed of tomorrow's dawn and the stories yet to be carved into the earth. The sky deepened into a rich, velvety blue as night settled over the camp, wrapping the world in a quiet embrace. The fire flickered softly, casting dancing shadows that played across the faces of the clan, their features etched with both weariness and a deep, unspoken resilience. The girl sat close to Tema, the warmth of the flames soothing the chill that had crept in with the evening. Around them, the air was alive with the soft murmurs of voices sharing stories, tales of ancestors, of the land, of the spirits that moved unseen but felt deeply. She traced patterns in the dirt with a slender stick, circles, spirals, lines, each symbol a thread in the vast tapestry of their history. The marks were more than just shapes, they were memories, prayers, and hopes given form. Tema's voice broke the silence, low and steady. Every story we tell, every mark we make, carries the weight of those who came before us. It is through these that we remember, and through these we endure. The girl nodded, feeling the truth settle within her. The clan was more than a group of people. They were keepers of a legacy, living threads woven into the fabric of the earth itself. Beyond the firelight, the forest breathed with life. The call of an owl echoed softly, a gentle reminder of the night's mysteries. Somewhere nearby, the rustle of leaves spoke of small creatures stirring in the underbrush. She thought of the wolf they had seen, the wild spirit that moved between worlds. The memory filled her with a strange comfort, a connection to something vast and timeless. The girl's fingers moved again, shaping a new symbol, a wolf's paw beside a human hand, joined in silent kinship. As the embers glowed faintly and the stars traced their eternal paths overhead, the girl closed her eyes, feeling the heartbeat of the earth beneath her. In that moment, she understood that their journey was more than survival. It was a story of connection, of respect, of life flowing through generations. And as sleep claimed her, the whispered songs of the forest sang her into dreams filled with light, shadow, and the endless dance of the wild. The first light of dawn stretched gently across the horizon, painting the sky with soft hues of pink and gold. The world seemed to hold its breath in that quiet moment between night and day, as if waiting for a new story to begin. The girl opened her eyes, feeling the cool touch of morning air on her skin and the steady rhythm of life around her. The camp stirred softly, figures moving with purpose, the murmur of voices mingling with the sounds of the forest waking from its slumber. Today marked more than just another day of survival. It was a moment of reflection, a turning point in the story she had been living, a story written in footprints on the earth, in marks carved on bark and stone, in whispered lessons passed from one heart to another. She rose slowly, her gaze drifting to the river nearby, its water sparkling like scattered stars. The flow of the stream reminded her of time itself, constant, ever-changing, carrying with it the memories of those who had come before and the promise of those yet to come. Gathering her belongings, the girl joined the clan as they prepared for the journey ahead. The elders spoke of the land's gifts and challenges, of the sacred balance between taking and giving, of the respect owed to the earth that sustained them. As they moved forward, the girl felt the weight and wonder of their shared story, a story not just of survival, but of connection, resilience, and hope. Each step was a thread woven into the tapestry of life, each mark a silent song echoing through time. And as the sun rose higher, bathing the world in warm light, the girl carried within her the enduring spirit of the wild, a spirit alive in every breath, every whisper, every heartbeat. The journey would continue, endless and unfolding, a story without end, forever written in the language of the earth and sky.